So last week I was in New York and I spoke at a VaynerX Google Summit about the state of social media in 2024, but more specifically platforms and cultures. And I think it's a must listen if content is at the center of your strategy for your business, your brand. Gary Vee gave the keynote, which was really dope. I think he'll probably upload it on his page. That's also a must listen, especially if you're a marketing professional. I also got to meet some incredible executives, Peter Chun, head of partnerships at VaynerX, Claire Kelly, head of creative partnerships at Google, Lauren Ebney, head of AI business strategy at Google. There's also some slides that Peter put up that I'm gonna put on your screen right now. I think they're really, really interesting. You're gonna wanna take a look at. This one in particular shows emerging platforms, what platforms are hottest right now, and what platforms are sort of being phased out. Let me know in the comments what you think too. If you agree with some of the stuff, what am I missing? What are you thinking about lately? I wanna hear from you, and enjoy the conversation.
Maybe we start with the AI stuff, Roberto. Maybe just talk a little bit around how you've gone about embracing it, and kind of how you think about where in your flow AI starts to play a role. And obviously it's incredibly helpful in a lot of different ways in storytelling, but also the upkeep of the current state of AI and what really needs to happen behind the scenes to get it to a place where it's usable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing for me, the reason why I love AI is because it helps me to tell stories that I would not have otherwise been able to tell. So in this particular video, I used AI to de-age myself and age myself up further. And funny enough, like the AI program that I used, it descaled the video to the point where then I used another AI to upscale the video, which was, I think, Topaz Video AI. And so as a storytelling device, I absolutely love it. And again, it enables me to do things that otherwise I would not have. So, you know, like Sora as an example, it's a great example. I think in 3 years, anything that you can imagine, you're literally going to be able to generate, and it's going to be indistinguishable from reality. Wow. I think that's a bit of a scary reality, but we've had that for a while in Hollywood, but it's been reserved only to Hollywood, right? Where like these Hollywood, they have the technology to be able to do this, but now everybody with a phone in 3 seconds can generate anything that they can imagine, including anybody doing anything. It's going to get scary, right? And so I try to keep everybody updated with my content just because I do think knowledge is power. And the more people know about this stuff, the more it diminishes its potential to be used maliciously. So that's why half of my content is about updating people on where it's at and where it's headed.
Well, it's interesting because you said in 3 years, or maybe it's less, the tools to make world-class production creative will be commoditized. Right. So what's going to be the approach, and how do brands start to think about standing apart? Right now, production value and execution plays a lot into what gets reach and what drives engagement. So if everything is now level set and there's a new baseline, what are some of the factors and consideration brands should be thinking about now to get
That's
ahead
a
of
great
that?
question. I mean, I come from a lens of a creator. Like Dominic, my friend here, we also create content around AI. And we're actually excited for AI to kind of commoditize content. Like there's going to be a flood of low effort AI generated content to social media. We think it's an opportunity to stand out. Because I do think what's paramount is trust, is storytelling, is your ability to really resonate and connect with an audience. And if it's 100% purely AI generated, this is my thesis, I don't think people find that interesting. I just don't. I don't look at a mid-journey image, aside from the initial novelty, it's like at first it's really impressive, but then there's no soul. I do think people will always desire the human element and the human connection. And so I think, again, AI, a lot of low effort content is going to be flooding the market, but that's an opportunity for brands and creators to really stand out by telling a story in a meaningful and impactful way.
Yeah, I think the point of soul is so important. As progressive and contemporary as AI is, it's very rare or unconceivable at this point to think AI will be able to predict memes, just because human thought and culture and of the moment is so unpredictable. And I think at the end of the day, that's something we certainly have. Let's talk a little bit around kind of content creation. Kind of the flow. The algorithms are crazy. You know, many of the brands here had seen brands generate, million view TikToks 18 to 22 months ago to now getting, roughly 10 or 15% that reach. We've seen organic reach on Instagram absolutely explode. And obviously Shorts is just absolutely cranking. But just curious how algorithms and what to make next and the kind of process of making content would just be helpful for you to share as much as you can.
Everything has changed so dramatically fast in the last 2 years. I really believe in this. Granted, I've only been a personal creator for 1.5 years. Before that, I was in product. But something interesting happened where in the last 18 months since I started, I've grown around 750,000 followers across all platforms. And I would say 15 years ago, I could have maybe been set for life. Today, it's meaningless. Like, I really believe followers, especially on platforms like TikTok, where you're literally having to recompete against the algorithm every time, a follower count is meaningless. That's something that's emerged recently. I know Adam Mosseri, head of Instagram, has been talking about this. I think that is such an interesting new paradigm, where it's like really the creative, as Gary likes to talk about, the creative is king. No longer, a follower count is now irrelevant. And that's one of the things that has been a little bit jarring, but exciting to kind of reconcile. That's like been on my mind recently over the last few months.
You know, just could we be honest in the room here? For the brands that are here, how many of you truly care about follower count?
Exactly.
That's awesome. How many brands are in here? Just kidding.
That's actually really impressive because a lot of the outreach that comes in, the inbound, they're pricing me based on a follower count. And I'm like, how outdated are? So there's a lot of savvy marketers in here, obviously. Because that still exists a lot, where people are valuing an account based on followers.
And when you think about KPIs more broadly, and you think about follower count, you had made a comment a little while back about how you could look at a creator and an audience's relationship and be able to get a very quick assessment of how strong or how weak it is.
Yeah.
And as brands here have to start to act as creators, and there is, of course, what we want the world to know of us as brands versus what people actually want to know of the brand in the category. Take us through that construct and like, what's the blink test on your end and what do you look for?
Funny enough, I'd almost like to volley that back to you because I think it's just a trained eye, doing this for so long on the other side and now as a creator, that when I go through a creator's profile, I can almost instantly tell whether they grew through giveaway loops or algorithm hacks or low quality effort, trend jacking, whatever it might be, or whether they grew through a real relationship with the audience. There's a lot that goes in there, and I just feel like it's almost like a sixth sense that you develop. So I'm wondering from like an agency side, how do you quantify that? What are you looking at? Because I'm actually curious.
Yeah, you know, we wrestle with this question a lot. We have JC here. JC, if you just raise your hand. He's our head of analytics, our chief analytics officer, and he's been leading a lot of our thinking and a framework around how do we measure good organic content. I think there's two sides of this, right? One which is all of us as consumers now consume a ton of TikTok, Reels, and Shorts. How many of you folks DM each other Reels or receive Reels DMs kind of on the regular? I'm seeing lots of head nods, lots of hands. My wife exclusively communicates to me via Reels about everything, food, family, travel, dad time, parent time, all that stuff. But aside from that, because we're all active consumers and knowing what good content looks like, at least for me and some of the small sample size of groups that I've spoken to, when someone sees a 2-3 million viewed short form video, be it Reels, TikTok, and it's sponsored, and there's no comments, or there's 4 comments, or there's 5 comments, those views may play well to actual internal MMM scoring and performance. But when I look at that, my reaction is, I wonder if this brand actually understands that they have impressions and reach, but not actual consumed reach. So going back to kind of Gary's point earlier this morning, not every view is created equal, and relevance creates consumed reach. And so how do we start to think about that in our day-to-day? But in a world where you have to keep up with that slide of all these new features, you know, it's very hard to take that time to get under there. So I think that's one end of the spectrum. And then the other end, we're seeing now, we call it commenting as creative. You know, commenting is a big thing. We saw some comments come up on the previous session. Those comments didn't exist necessarily as a strategy 9 months ago. It was in a world where algorithms are constantly changing, distribution was going down, and we said, hey, who are the 5 to 10 arbiters of any topic that exist? So whether it's taxes, right? Jill's here from HR Block. We've got CPG companies. We've got retail companies. Very specific fitness. Like you can get very nuanced now with all the algorithms. So it's who are the arbiters of that conversation? And if they're generating hundreds of thousands, millions of views a day, our brands with the blue check marks, all of you in the audience, you are the influencer and creator of that category. You have invested millions of dollars into building your equity with consumers to a place where when you comment, the algorithms will help serve you, but more importantly, you're kind of arbitraging a lot of those views because you have a right to be in that conversation. So we're seeing comments generate more likes than organic and paid videos combined. We're also seeing comments really get to a place where it's building social informed campaigns, as Garrett had mentioned earlier. So I think those are kind of like the two ends of the spectrum and kind of everything in between. But the challenge, and I think all of us have to think about, by the time we get our organizations ready to do something like commenting as creative may be less relevant. And so it's less about attacking the what versus how do we create an environment to say, like, this stuff is new, we're going to look around, not many brands are doing it, but it's underpriced. And then once it becomes saturated, what is the next thing that we do? And the hardest part is you're going to have to trust either your partner, your internal data, your stakeholders, and a lot of it's going to be your instinct of knowing your customer base to say this is what we should do. But I think that in a lot of ways that's kind of...
There's two interesting things there. One, you said not all views are created equal. That's the truest statement that I've heard today. I have friends who have 10,000 subscribers on YouTube who are educational YouTubers, and they're bringing in more revenue than a TikToker with 8 million views who's just hijacking the latest dance trend or whatever. So that's super interesting. And then commenting as creative, that's fascinating to me. I have a lot of friends who are now, and maybe this is against FTC guidelines, I don't know, but they're actually pinning comments and selling that as a service. So I had one big creator friend who made a, he didn't mark it as organic, so I'm not going to call him out in case he gets in trouble, or mark it as paid, but he made this funny video about modern dating versus traditional, like old school dating. And then one of the big dating apps, he sold a pinned comment to, and it got like 23,000 likes, that comment. Wow. So it got a lot of impressions, and it was really endearing for the dating app. I don't know the analytics in the back end, how impactful that was, but I thought that was interesting. And I think maybe there's a category there where, when you're working with creators as a brand, and maybe you give them full creativity. Maybe they're not mentioning your brand directly, but in the comments, some magic may happen there. Because to your point, comments are almost as part of the game now as the main creative. Yeah. You see something, you go into the comments, you want to be part of the conversation, you're interested in what people are saying. So me as a creator now, I would maybe say to professional marketing folks, I think there's something there.
Yeah, and it's discerning the signal versus the noise, right? Because at some point everything's going to get 100 comments and like what's good versus not good. And the other thing that I thought was very interesting is you casually talk about doing these tests when you put videos out, and it's like, oh, this was a banger. I got 35 million views. Mm-hmm. And then for some brands, like that's the North Star. Mm-hmm. But for you, it's just an input and a signal and a mechanism. And as you think about short form video and long form video, and for those of you that don't know Roberto, I would say after this Thursday, many of you will know him very, very well. And we can't disclose kind of what's going down, but in our world, there'll be a lot of news. So this is a really, really special treat.
Could flop.
Yes, everyone should. And by the way, can we just we'll try to leave. We got about 15 minutes left. We're going to try to leave 5 to 6 minutes of real questions because I think we should really take advantage of Roberto. He flew out here just for the day, so we're really grateful for that. But let's talk a little bit around kind of the construct of evaluating how you test and how you think and how you create a little bit of elasticity.
First, I want to thank Google and I want to thank VaynerX. I'm not an active YouTuber. I'm mostly short form, and I would say Instagram is my main platform. Now, granted, YouTube is a North Star, and I think next week will be my first, or one of my first YouTube videos, like my first real one, let's say. So when I create, I'm usually going through the lens of because my relationship is on Instagram. Like that's where I know my audience. That's where I have the most attention. I kind of use TikTok almost as a guinea pig. So I'll like run something on TikTok and I'll see the early analytics. And then from there, I'll tweak it to serve the Instagram platform, if that makes sense. So I'm really big on, I create a piece of content. It could be something like a long form newsletter. And then I take that and then I repurpose it to best serve each platform. Because I do think, and Gary alluded to it earlier, and that chasm between like what each platform wants is really, really growing. So I think the specific culture on each platform is as different as I've ever seen it. I used to post something on Instagram and it would go viral on TikTok and Twitter and YouTube Shorts, and it was all good, and I wouldn't change anything up, like almost same caption, same creative. But now I'm actively like tweaking the hook, definitely like Gary said, at least minimum different captions. Like I'm changing it up and I'm repurposing it for every platform.
Right. So but being native,
Yeah, but in general, like I know Instagram really, really well. I'm still like YouTube. I'm a novice, so I'm glad I'm here. I want to learn. And TikTok just has such a different culture from the audience that I want to serve that it's not as important to me in my sort of in my workflow.
I think that's a super important call out because I think all of us rush to kind of where the press and our peers kind of push time and attention. But I think your point is like your audience and understanding where your audience is super important. Some of the things you just outlined kind of feed a little bit into this, in my mind, a thesis that everyone's looking for a playbook that currently doesn't exist. And there really isn't a playbook. And I know you may have a couple of thoughts on that.
I mean, you know, it used to be what worked last year doesn't work this year. Now it's like what works last week didn't work this week.
Yeah.
I do believe that, you know, we always throw around the term creator economy. I kind of just think it's the economy now. Like everybody's a creator.
Right.
And the level of competition is remarkable. Like I'm always in awe of like creator peers or brands or even the creative that Claire showed earlier. Incredible.
So good.
Right? And it's social first. It's like really understanding the audience on social. And so, yeah, I'm just in awe of what I'm seeing. I forgot the original question, but I just wanted to make that point.
So, and look, I can build on it, right? Which is there really isn't a playbook.
Yeah.
I think the point you made of what worked last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, let alone 2000. I mean, 2017 was like heyday in a lot of ways for marketers, and we're still carrying off of it. Agencies are still using performance and above the line creative from that era to go win business today. And in a lot of ways, being the best marketing engine even 2-3 years ago may make you the worst marketing engine going into 2025 if you don't understand the idea of how to be relevant and keep up with all these changes that are happening. Let's talk a little bit around, we've got brands, we've got creators here in the audience. Maybe some practical advice, just like maybe we can popcorn some stuff back and forth.
Yeah.
But let's start actually for the creators. We've been talking a lot about brands.
Yeah.
You're embarking on what appears to be longer form, and that's a little bit of a leap. And so, doesn't have to be in that topic, but some advice for creators in there.
I first want to say why I'm excited to get into YouTube and why I love YouTube so much. This is kind of like a personal thesis. I would say it's anecdotal. But do you know Sam Sulek? Does anybody in the audience know Sam Sulek? He's like a young bodybuilder, and his content, he just turns on a camera and he just talks. There's no thumbnail, there's no focus on the hook, there's nothing. And he's gotten super big. I think he's one of the big creators on the platform now. And everybody's now trying to follow the Sam Sulek playbook. But what I kind of think is happening, and you know, people are YouTube in here, they can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that over 50% of YouTube consumption now is on the TV. And in my own personal behavior and other consumer behaviors that I see just from friends, acquaintances, a lot of YouTube is on the second monitor. It's on a different tab. It's on the TV in the background as they work. And that's what I'm most excited about when it comes to YouTube. It's almost like a comfort view in a way.
It's almost like Spotify in the background.
Yeah, but I use YouTube to consume podcasts.
Correct.
And like sometimes I'll glance over and look at like Chris Williamson's cinematics, and that's pretty cool, but like it's mostly audio consumption. And I think that's what's happening with Sam Sulek. He's kind of in the background, almost like a homie that just kind of, he's there throughout your day. It almost like makes you less lonely while you work. And that's kind of my own personal thesis. And my YouTube strategy is gonna be more information, more conversational podcast style. And so I'm really excited for that. And I think that you really develop like a close-knit relationship with the audience when you're sort of in their background. And not to say that nobody's directly watching YouTube, of course, but I've seen that play out more and more, and I'm really interested in that.
And then that would then play a little bit into the long form element as well.
Yeah.
You know, I'd be curious, I was gonna ask Gary this if no one had questions for him, and I think everyone has a different perspective here. I'd be curious for yours. Brands don't have an infinite, and creators don't have an infinite amount of oxygen to test. So part of it is, when do I, not necessarily start, people can start, but picking and choosing is almost secondary to how do I know when I stop and know it's not working? And then how do I then start to pivot and move to the next thing?
That's such a tricky question because I've seen it all. I've seen like me and Dominic, we were kind of lucky in a sense, not to diminish any of our work, but it worked right away. And I've seen creators who've been in the trenches for 8 years with no signal, and they continued having faith in themselves, even though everybody was telling them, hey, you got to look at this data, this isn't working. 9th year, they explode. 10th year, they explode. And so, just to be candid, I don't really have an answer there. I think it depends on the creator. But when I do mentor creators, I'm always focused on the mindset. I think it's really easy to learn, or maybe not easy, but like you can learn editing techniques. You can learn how to resonate with a particular audience, how to communicate with a specific audience. You can learn, how to craft a hook, whether it be a visual hook or an audio hook. All this stuff can be learned. But the mindset is usually the tough one.
Right.
putting yourself out there, getting that potential negative feedback, overthinking how people may be thinking about you, even though it's something called the spotlight effect where nobody's thinking about any of us except for our own selves. And so I'm usually focused on the mindset when I give advice to creators, which is something that I don't think is talked about enough.
That's huge. Let's pivot a little bit, and maybe we can get some brand advice before we run out of time to get to some questions. We talked a lot about as brands as creators. We're starting to see creators as brands. And as you just kind of survey the landscape, there's probably attributes that Gary mentioned earlier as well on what makes them accelerate and grow, but kind of any pulse or hot takes on the creators as brands market and kind of how far up? Yeah.
So many examples. One thing I will say is that I really believe that people buy from people, but more importantly, people buy from people that they like and that they trust. And so again, coming from an Instagram lens, I apologize to the YouTube family, but brand accounts are kind of dying. They're kind of dead. That's my personal thesis. In place of it is the actual founder. So you want Elon Musk is like the classic example of this, right? Tesla has, I don't know how many followers, but Elon has the most followers. Tesla's engagement is completely cooked, maybe like a 0.04% engagement, nobody really cares. But when Elon retweets it or talks about it, that's when the impact happens. And I think that same playbook can be sort of adopted for smaller brands, even individual creators. I kind of personally have a good example of this where we launched a SaaS AI platform called Illuna. And I was able to get 250,000 signups.
Whoa.
Granted, it only converted like a 4 to 5%, so we looked at that and now we're kind of pivoting away because it was a media generation platform. But the fact that me, just from my personal content, was able to get 250,000 signups to the website kind of proved my thesis and was really telling. Versus, I have the Illuna AI account.
Right.
That did not drive that many signups, right? But it was my content when I was tracking it that did. So I think that proves my thesis in that, you know, if you're a brand or if you're a creator, or if you're a creator that's coming out with merch or a product or whatever it may be, it's like the distribution strategy still needs to be very much focused on your own personal brand versus the brand's brand. If that makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah.
On the other end of that, you've got, you know, Logan Paul and Prime. You know,
Great
you've
example.
got Rihanna and Fenty. Those are probably like at the peak. Emma Chamberlain with the coffee brand. Do you think that there's going to be more and more creators coming in there? To your point, they've built a relationship, they have a personal connection. Do you think we'll see more of that, or do you think we're kind of in now that the mid-torso creators that have 1 million, 2 million followers, which is enormous, but in the grand scheme of things smaller, are trying to monetize? Like trust is now out of the system?
Yeah. I think, you know, I come from a product background, so I still have a lot of friends building product, and usually they're seeking out. It used to be kind of like the technical co-founder, and Jobs Wozniak, the classic example. But now it's like a technical co-founder seeking out an attention co-founder, and that is working really well, especially on X, Twitter, because I'm like super active there. Even though I'm kind of like the stock is dwindling, I think a little for me, but I've seen that a lot, and people are getting incredible results to that. I think Logan Paul Prime is a great example. I don't think he's involved in the day-to-day operations or the marketing or these boardroom meetings. I think he's really just the attention co-founder. And that can be done at scale or even to smaller creators with, you know, a digital product or whatever it might be.
That's really interesting. The attention co-founder.
Yeah.
That's, I think, a big takeaway. That's something I've learned just from this conversation, and likely valuable for all of us. I'm seeing a lot of head nods, which is cool. All right, maybe one more question before we get into Q&A. Not to go back to AI and typecast you as the AI guy.
That's fine.
I just think the work that you've put is so natural and endemic and fluid. It's so complementary to storytelling. Can you just share a little bit of the tools, the stack, and kind of where through your production and ideation flow you're using some of these AI tools and kind of which those players are? Obviously, this is not sponsored by any of these partners, but I think it could be just helpful for everyone to think about.
There's a lot. So I mean, like it would kind of like depend on specific examples. But here's one example that I've been using lately. I use a lot of stock music sites. Like Epidemic Music is one that I use. There's Artlist. There's others. There are two platforms in particular that just came out. Dominic, I know you know them. Suno and Udio. I don't know if anybody's heard of these.
Suno and
Udio. They are phenomenal to the point where I'm generating music that I can use for my videos, by the way. And that separates me because I'm not using the same stock sound or whatever as other creators. There was one song I generated that actually got stuck in my head. And I'm like, Like
This is a real tune, yeah.
I got a robot. The robot made this, and now it's stuck in my head, and it's pretty incredible. The lo-fi example that Claire put up, I've made an entire lo-fi playlist AI generated, and it's unbelievable.
Wow.
Granted, I'm not of the mindset that this is going to replace musicians because there's still no soul. It's very much still soulless. And again, as I said earlier, I really, really believe the human element is always going to be key. We don't like watching robots play each other in chess. We like watching, that's one example. But so music is one way that I'm using an AI to push the story further. I can maybe generate a specific drum or a sound that I may not be able to find otherwise. It's hard to do without examples, but I've been doing like these storytelling videos where I'm narrating something, and I can create like these almost Hollywood level, very interesting and intricate visuals that before I probably would have had to put 3 years into Blender to learn these three, and now I can do that with AI to help tell the story. That's another example.
And what products and tools are you using?
So for that, I would use a Mid-Journey generation, and then I would upscale in Magnific, which is a friend's company, so it's a bit of a plug, but it's a great upscaler. And then I would put it in a Runway to give it some motion.
Right.
And then there'd be a lot of physical work that I'd have to do in Photoshop, which I think makes it interesting.
Can you just break down upscaling for the folks here, because they may not?
Yes. So there's two versions of upscaling. One is, so say you have like a really small artifacted image that's like 480 by 520, you want to blow it up to 4K, you can upscale that, and basically the noise and the grain in that image, there's a process called diffusion. This is how AI image generation happens. And the computer is basically its best guess of how to fill in that pixel, so it can actually blow it up to 4K. But now with AI, you have these upscalers that are actually reimagining the creative, depending on your prompt and depending on some of the parameters that you set. And so I'm always upscaling stuff. As an example, there was like a classic iconic Steve Jobs pic where he's sitting on the ground, but like the highest resolution one on the internet is really small. I was able to upscale that to 4K for a piece of creative that I put out there, and it was like I had the original image from the photographer. So upscaling, I love it in my workflow. It's a great tool.
And then as far as publishing, you go native, highest quality output, all of that stuff?
I go 1080 because actually if you're going 4K, at least on Instagram and TikTok, there's a compression algorithm that kind of knocks some of that quality out. Yeah. So we can get into that nerdy talk,
which is amazing.
There's a specific output workflow that I use, yeah.
Awesome. We've got time for 2 or 3 questions. Oh, looks like we don't have time for 2 or 3 questions.
All right.
Let's just do a quick recap. So one, in a world where we have to make a ton of content, I think we have to just be very comfortable with testing and putting a lot of things out in the market. We call it yes and. So Roberto going from short form to long form, getting 30 million view hits, not to celebrate, but just get as a learning to get into a tighter craft around how he builds relationships. I think that's a really important mindset for us. 2, this idea of like a chief attention officer seems super, super smart. We're lucky we have Wanda Pogue here. She's our chief strategy officer, so she can probably share a lot of thoughts on that. But it's a really interesting construct because attention and relevance very much go hand in hand. And the third thing is, let's think about a lot of these tools practically and learning them and understanding them and not shying away from it. You know, Gemini is on the cusp and precipice of launching all kinds of stuff. So if you're not a Google G Suite customer or you're just kind of getting some feels, a lot of them are free. So learn how to put a prompt in, understand what can be an image, what can be upscaled, what can become motion, and think about how all those things come together to become a really good piece of creative. And lastly, just want to thank you, Roberto. A big week coming up for you. We're excited for you.
Yeah,
and we're looking forward to it.
Thank everybody for having me too. It's an honor, so I really appreciate it.